Years after Joseph Smith's assassination, Josiah Quincy wrote a book in which he devoted a chapter to his meeting of Joseph Smith. This was a book devoted to interesting people Josiah Quincy had the pleasure of meeting during his lifetime. He wrote a very interesting version of Joseph Smith, expressing both admiration and surprise at the humorous nature of the prophet. While Josiah Quincy indicated that they happened, he and his companion, Charles Adams, just happened to stop at Nauvoo during a rainy night, it is apparent to me that these two eminent political families had made a devoted effort to meet Joseph Smith, since he controlled the Mormon vote in one of the largest cities in Illinois, and Illinois was considered an anti-slavery state, and Joseph Smith was an abolitionist, as was Josiah Quincy and the Adams families. They were decidedly against slavery, and they wanted to know how Joseph Smith was going to throw or place the Mormon vote. Of course, Joseph Smith indicated he was definitely anti-slavery. He indicated he despised Tippecanoe and Tyler too, the candidate, and was a Clayman. Henry Clay he was going to vote for. However, Josiah Quincy sarcastically remarked that Henry Clay was not a friend to Mormonism, because he had indicated that the Mormons, in all their persecution, needed to go to Oregon Territory to get out of the persecution of the United States, rather than supporting the Mormons and devoting money and troops to the defense of the Mormon community. Josiah Quincy and Charles Adams were friendly to the Mormon community, which had been persecuted not for their religion, but for their interracial character, and the fact that when they moved into certain communities, they voted anti-slavery. So here's the reminiscences of Josiah Quincy as Joseph Smith and his mother, Lucy Mack Smith, show him the mummies and the scrolls on which the Utah Mormon Church claimed the Book of Abraham was written. However, Joseph Smith gives additional information and appears to not even know that the Book of Abraham existed in April of 1844. And this is my theory, that the Book of Abraham was written years later in Utah and inserted, and was a forgery inserted into old papers of the Times and Seasons, long after the Times and Season had ceased to exist. Yes. And you ask, how was this done? Well, the Quorum of the 12 had purchased the Times and Season printing press, and they had transferred it over prairies to Utah, in which they started to doctor up all the documents of the Nauvoo period. One of them which was the Book of Abraham, that could have been reprinted and put into what appeared to be Times and Seasons, and then reprinted as if it was done in March of 1842. If you don't follow Mark Hoffman learned how to forge and sell forged Mormon documents from someone, and I believe he learned it from the best, Brigham Young and the Quorum of the 12, who were engaged tirelessly in forging old Mormon documents. As you know, Orson Pratt was basically a genius, and he assisted the old Mormon Guard in Brigham Young territory to forge the history that they wanted, not the actual Nauvoo history of Joseph Smith, who was a Union loyalist and an anti-slavery complete opposite of Brigham Young and the territory of Deseret, that they turned into a slave state and turned into a polygamous state. Yes, jumping from bed to bed, these immoral, sexually degenerate men. And we know only heartache is derived from a sharing of women as if they are your property. Unfortunately, Utah Brighamite Mormons seem to want to rewrite the history of the Joseph Smith Church, which they infiltrated and stole and turned into a terroristic Western state on the borders of the United States, and which they declared war on the United States in advance of the Confederate States waging war against the United States in the most bloody war of our history, the United States Civil War.
"And now come with me," said the prophet, "and I will show you the curiosities." So saying, he led the way to a lower room, where sat a venerable and respectable-looking lady. "This is my mother, gentlemen. The curiosities we shall see belong to her. They were purchased with her own money at a cost of $6,000. And then, with deep feeling, were added the words, 'And that woman was turned out upon the prairie in the dead of night by a mob.'"
So what do you learn that is completely hidden by the Utah Brighamite Church is one, the mummies and the curiosities were owned by Joseph Smith's mother, Lucy Mack Smith. They were not owned or purchased by the LDS Church. 2, she paid $6,000 for the mummies and the scrolls, which the Utah Mormon Church claims to be the basis of the Book of Abraham, which it was not. Lucy and Joseph Smith appear to have no idea the Book of Abraham has been translated or existed at this time, which is April 1844. Then number 3, Joseph Smith refers to his mother, Lucy Mack Smith, escaping Missouri in the dead of night. She writes in her own autobiography, which they call Joseph Smith's autobiography. Yes, they just diminish women's roles. But anyway, Lucy Mack Smith, who purchased these mummies because she was from a wealthy family and had wealthy brothers who financed the church and actually financed the Kirtland Temple, she escaped with these mummies in a wagon because the creditors of Missouri were trying to, of the Kirtland Society, Banking Society, were trying to steal the mummies and the curiosities to pay for some of the debts. Well, Lucy Mack and her husband, Joseph Smith, escaped in the dead of night with these mummies and scrolls in the back of their wagon. That is what Joseph Smith is referring to. And yes, this is credible evidence that Joseph Smith is telling the truth. And Josiah is telling the truth because Lucy Mack herself wrote it years later in her own autobiography. So let's continue with this interesting version of the mummies and the scrolls, which supposedly form some kind of crazy book called the Book of Abraham that deals with racial relations.
There were some pine presses fixed against the wall of the room. These receptacles Smith opened and disclosed 4 human bodies, shrunken and black with age. "These are mummies," said the exhibitor. "I want you to look at that little run of a fellow over there. He was a great man in his day. Why, that was Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt. Some parchments inscribed with hieroglyphics were then offered us. They were preserved under glass and handled with great respect. That is the handwriting of Abraham, the father of the faithful," said the prophet. "This is the autograph of Moses, and these lines were written by his brother Aaron."
So who was Pharaoh Necho or Necho, king of Egypt? Why did Joseph Smith and Lucy Mack Smith believe he was important? Well, this following video will introduce you to how important Pharaoh Necho is to Christianity and Judah. And if Joseph Smith and Lucy Mack Smith had had the opportunity to write the book of Necho, this is what it would have said.
In the annals of ancient history, the biblical figure Necho occupies a significant place, as he was the illustrious Pharaoh Necho, or Necho II, who reigned over Egypt during the 26th dynasty from approximately 610 to 595 BC. The etymology of his name, Necho, interestingly means carrying out the desires of the heart, which provides a glimpse into the culture and beliefs of his time.
This is absolutely true. If you study Egyptian culture, it was a gentle, joyful religion. If you go into some of the tombs, you will see children playing, swinging from trees, and running down rivers on boats. And the Book of the Dead, when the deceased person reaches the judgment seat, he is asked questions in the positive, not the negative. He is asked, how many people did you make happy? Did you serve your wife well? Did you serve your children well? Did your employees and servants love you? Did you treat them with graciousness and kindness? They were positive reports. And if you answered correctly and your heart was as light as a feather because of all the laughter and joy you brought the world while you were alive, you passed into the Egyptian heaven. This is contrary to the Babylonian cruel religion, in which they tell their people, you were born into sin, and thou shalt not do all your sinful ways. Thou shalt not hurt other people. Thou shalt not kill other people. Thou shalt not worship other gods. I mean, it's a complete opposite of the Egyptian celestial passage, which requires you to report the good deeds you did, not that you failed, not that you refuse to engage in your sinful ways. So besides Necho meaning joy of the heart, it also means born.
Kings Josiah, Jehoahaz, and Jehoiakim, and the prophet Jeremiah.
I hope you understood that. He talked about the princes Boaz and Jehoiakim, which are the two pillars of masonry that you enter in when you become a mason. They are the two pillars of the temple.
Building projects, sought to establish an Egyptian navy, and even embarked on an ambitious endeavor to create a canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea, a vision that would find its realization millennia later in the form of the Suez Canal. Within the biblical narrative, Pharaoh Necho appears on several occasions of three powerful kingdoms of his era: Assyria, Babylon, and Judah. Assyria reigned as the dominant power in the Middle Eastern region and demanding tribute and slaves from vanquished lands. One such territory under Assyrian control was Babylon. However, the Babylonians, led by General Nabopolassar, and with the assistance of the Medes and Scythians, launched a successful revolt that culminated in the fall of the chief Assyrian city, Nineveh, around 612 BC. The Assyrians, under threat from the Babylonians, sought aid from their Egyptian allies. Pharaoh Necho led a formidable Egyptian force towards the Assyrian capital, Haran, a journey that took them in close proximity to the borders of Judah. Here, a fateful encounter occurred when they crossed paths with King Josiah, leading to the tragic demise of the Judean ruler at Megiddo in 609 BC. 2 Chronicles 35:20-24 adds a detail that Pharaoh Necho had warned King Josiah not to intervene, but his counsel went unheeded. King Josiah encountered Pharaoh Necho, who ultimately killed him at Megiddo upon seeing him. Following this, Josiah's servants transported his lifeless body in a chariot from Megiddo to Jerusalem, where they laid him to rest in his personal tomb. Despite Pharaoh Necho's efforts, Haran ultimately succumbed to Babylonian forces in the same year. Necho regrouped his troops at Carchemish on the west bank of the Euphrates, where they would face Nabopolassar's Babylonian armies, leading to a decisive Babylonian victory in 605 BC, as documented in Jeremiah 46:2. As the pages of history turned, Pharaoh Necho and his forces found themselves once again traversing Judah, where Josiah's son Jehoahaz had ascended the throne. In a swift turn of events, Necho deposed the young king, replacing him with Jehoiakim, formerly known as Eliakim. Jehoahaz was taken to Egypt, where he met his demise, while Jehoiakim ruled Judah under the shadow of paying tribute to Pharaoh Necho, as recorded in 2 Kings 23:33-35 and 2 Chronicles 36:3-4. In time, Nabopolassar dispatched his son Nebuchadnezzar to initiate a siege against Egypt, a formidable force that Pharaoh Necho struggled to withstand. When no reinforcements materialized, he was compelled to pay tribute to Babylon. This period saw the fulfillment of prophecies by the prophet Jeremiah, with God's judgment on Egypt and Pharaoh Necho for their transgressions. Nebuchadnezzar emerged as the instrument of divine discipline not only for Egypt, but also for Judah, albeit with different outcomes. While Egypt faced defeat, God's people in Judah were preserved, underscoring the intricate interplay of history and divine providence during the reign of Pharaoh Necho.